Welcome to the Customer Success from the Ground Up podcast with me, Mike Marshall, Customer Success Leader.
And me, Deborah Knight, founder of CS Consultancy Captive.
Each episode, we interview people that have set up customer success from the ground up at their companies.
And we try and have a lot of fun in the process.
We hope you enjoy the next episode. Hello. How's it going, Deb?
Hey, Mike, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Welcome to our third installment of the Customer Success from the Ground Up podcast with Mike Marshall, 10 years in customer success, work at WalkMe at the moment, and the wonderful Deborah Knight.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm here with Mike. We're absolute pros at this now, aren't we, Mike?
Oh yeah, we're expert professional podcasters right now. So we're very lucky today to have an excellent podcast host called Iram, who is going to be joining us, Iram Cook-Monie, and has been part of our customer success leadership community since the very start, and as has Deborah, I will maintain. But yeah, always lovely to see you around. Thank you for joining. And in a moment, we'll let her introduce herself properly and crack on with it. Iram's going to be talking about her experience today of setting up customer success from the ground up, which she definitely has pretty experienced in, and also about keeping it simple and the importance of simplicity when you're first starting to set up a retention process and all those wonderful things. So before we crack on with that, we always run a section, Iram, called That Escalated Fast, where we review sometimes the more bizarre or funny elements that people go through in the world of customer success and give our 2 cents on how maybe we would approach it. And obviously we're going to ask you your thoughts as well, Iram, if that's okay. So let's crack on. I found one earlier. Basically this means me trawling Reddit forums for customer success forums. So I found this quite funny. I'm a CSM. Sorry, I always say the handle because it's always quite amusing. This is LM09127, so it's a bit of a dull handle.
Rolls off the tongue, that one.
It didn't have anything comedy in it, which is a shame, I'm afraid. But I'm a CSM and I don't know what I'm doing. Help! Exclamation mark. So never an easy
we're
situation.
podcasters and we don't know what we're doing.
Exactly.
We're all in it together.
I think CSM is obviously something that isn't usually particularly entry level. People have come in from previous experience, but this person has been a bit concerned. So they've actually been a CSM in title for 10 years, but haven't done true CSM work until now, which is interesting. Started basically as a renewals person, slowly fell their way into working with very large complex accounts. Done okay because I know the product well, and I'm a certified yapper. So that sounds quite an English thing to say. So maybe they're an English person. I can BS like no one's business, apparently. But the imposter syndrome is getting to me. And with all this AI looming, I feel like I need to step it up. I'm looking for recommendations for books, podcasts, YouTube series is a blatant push here on our podcast, but about how to approach customer success intelligently. I work for a huge disorganized company with atrocious trainings, so I want to take it upon myself to get better. So I think it's an interesting point. I think when you're a CSM leader, the people that have been in my teams have obviously asked, are there any things I could be doing, events I could be attending, communities I could be joining, or general, certified courses, stuff like that. I think I'll hand over to our guest initially. Iram, are there things that you've done maybe individually, or you've suggested to people in your teams that maybe they should do to kind of enable themselves on things customer success?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that you can do now. And there are lots more resources available, like books and podcasts. But I think my personal favorite is attending networking events. And I think when you have the opportunity to speak one-on-one with somebody, and particularly find someone who has had quite a similar experience to you, is operating in a similar space, that's where you can really get some very actionable takeaways, things that you can actually implement yourself, because often the advice can be quite general, or it might not apply to you, because as we know, CS could look very, very different in different organizations. And it sounds like maybe that's what has led to some of those feelings of imposter syndrome, because it can be, really different. And I sometimes feel like, I don't know if I'm doing pure CS, because I'm going to such early stage businesses where often, the CS is doing absolutely everything post-sale. So I can relate to that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've definitely been to some good events outside of the ones that we run, obviously, and learnt a lot. But Deborah, what about yourself? Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think first of all, to this person, well done for taking your own initiative and sort of seeking advice out there and trying to figure out what are the right sort of extracurricular type things that you should be doing. I think one of the things I always think about is how are you listening to podcasts? How are you consuming information? Because quite often we do it passively. And actually, what you need to do is think about how do you apply that to your situation, right? So rather than like listening and sort of, I quite like to listen to podcasts when I'm out walking the dog or whatever. But actually, if I really need to learn something, I sit down at home with a pen and paper, pretty old school, and I really like think like, how does that apply to me? So I think that that's one of the things. There's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of books and things like that, but really what you need is to apply it to your situation and your context. And you can only really do that if you're thinking actively about it rather than passively.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like taking the bit more of a proactive approach makes complete sense. I think to your point around sort of being in events, I think like, I know I get approached by people like ex-colleagues and people I've worked with and even customers who are now CSMs, and I think often if they sort of know that you've got relevant experience, people like to hear from people that they trust and get that sort of advice and ask those questions. And you do get that at events, right? And that could be any kind of a customer success event. You kind of find someone who's got a similar role as you or been in a similar situation. It's like you can learn a lot from them, take a lot away from it. And it's like, okay, that's how they did it. Maybe that's what I could do. So, yeah, always interesting. So I think let's move on to let's get an introduction from our wonderful guest. Iram, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you very much for your time. So, I'll let Iram introduce herself, but she's very experienced at really early stage CS. So I think perfect guest for this podcast. So Iram, lovely to hear a bit about you. And then I'll hand over to my wonderful podcast co-host, Deborah, who will walk through some easy questions to begin with. We will start with easy ones and then progress a little bit more from there. So Iram, lovely to hear about you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mike and Deborah. It is a pleasure to be here. So yeah, as you mentioned, I have a lot of experience in very early stage startups. So the last 7 or 8 years, I have been joining really early stage startups. So talking pre-seed to kind of Series A. My first CS role was in a pre-seed company where I was the first employee. I hadn't done customer success before, so definitely feeling some of those feelings of imposter syndrome that Reddit user mentioned as well. And I've really had to look kind of outward at best practice and work out, what actually is customer success? What do we need to do to service our customers and to make them successful? So I've often been a solo CSM, kind of then moving into more of a player coach role, building out a small team, building out processes alongside that. All kind of come in alongside like an existing services or operations team. So customer success isn't doing absolutely everything, and we're trying to work out where to focus on first. And I think there's always absolutely so much you could do, lots of fires to fight. All of the processes need to be built because there is literally nothing there. So that's why I have the motto now of trying to keep it simple, because there's so much you can do. You need to choose the most important thing to do first.
I love that.
Yeah.
I had a colleague before, and he used to say, find the laziest person in the room and ask them to design a new process, because they will find the easiest and most simple way to do it, because they're lazy. I'm not suggesting you're lazy, but I think that idea of really focusing and being simple in the process is really important. So we'll dig into that in a bit more detail in a sec. But before we do, we've got a little icebreaker for you. I don't know if Mike warmed you up, but we do tend to drop these on our guests, just to keep them on their toes. So I hope you're ready for this. She's looking scared. I'll keep it simple, seeing as that is our theme today. But what is your CS superpower, and when did you realise you had it?
So I think my CS superpower is that I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. Like um I can do commercial, I can build relationships, I'm quite analytical, so I can also like get stuck in and like do a little bit of like SQL. And that is just so useful in those really early stage companies where you don't have your business operations team or RevOps to help support you with the implementation of a tool. You kind of need to be able to get like really stuck in and do that sort of stuff alongside thinking about the strategy, alongside then doing everything else that is involved in customer success. So I think that's been definitely my superpower in being able to do these really early stage founding CS roles.
Brilliant. And when did you realize you had that skill, that superpower?
I think I've always been a little bit of a jack of all trades and always been a little bit of a generalist going back to school. But I think definitely when I joined that Orbital, and that was my first CS role, I hadn't done CS before, and it was really early stage. I was the first employee, so I was really getting stuck in with lots of different things, and that kind of really solidified to me like, oh, I can kind of get stuck in and do some implementation of a tool and do some data analysis and also do the commercial relationships as well.
Okay, brilliant. All right, well, thank you for that. So moving on then into your sort of lesson that you've learned over the various roles that you've had, being that very early stage. And you talked earlier about really sort of trying to focus on one thing. What does that often look like? What might that one thing be?
So the kind of example, one of the clearest examples I have from my experience where I've kind of not kept it simple, which really has taught me this lesson, is when I joined Orbital, when I was first learning about all the wonderful things you can do in customer success, and I heard about the importance of health scores. I then went on to try and create a very complicated health scoring system with weighted points based on levels across lots of different factors, predominantly usage statistics, which was the main kind of numerical data I could get my hands on, for a relatively small number of customers. So essentially I was over engineering this health score, which it did not need to be that complicated. It didn't really kind of tell us much beyond what a simple kind of gut feel like RAG status could tell you just by looking at the numbers. But I thought that's what you're meant to be doing. I thought you're meant to be creating these complicated health scores, and it was it was a bit of a waste of time really. And in retrospect, it could have been kept much more simple. So now when I am going into an organization and I'm thinking about where are the kind of the gaps or the most important processes we need to work on, first of all, to me, keeping it simple is focusing on like one thing at a time and doing that well. It doesn't mean it has to be the most simple solution. It can be, but it's thinking ahead a little bit. Like, for example, if we know that we need to implement a support tool to handle support requests, can we purchase a tool that is going to help kill a few birds with one stone, and keep it simple in that we are just choosing one platform to cover a few different use cases. So it's really about kind of prioritizing and future proofing without needlessly like overcomplicating, and working smart really with the time and resources you have, because it will be limited when you're early stage and you're also trying to do the role of a CSM as well.
And I love the first example there of the health score, because I'm going to put my hands up and say I think that was one of my early mistakes in one of my first CS leadership roles as well. Probably about 9 years ago now, but still. I built the a weighted health score, different pillars, and I loved it. I was so proud of it. I still feel like I love it now, to be honest, but it really didn't work. And it was just like, I probably spent more time explaining it to anybody than actually fueling any sort of form of intelligence. So I think, and I think that many businesses. What was that, Mike?
I'm sure you're I'm sure you're both probably quite passionate about it, because you understand the data and you've both put kind of that time into working it out. But I think it's one of those things that's sort of where, to your point, sort of like, does it become just that RAG sort of status? Is it basically just, is it red, amber, or green? It's sort of, how does that correlate their health status into, the forecasting of renewals? I'm interested on, like, was it successful? Did it work out well for both of you on when you created your own health score? Like,
So
was
I,
it predictive?
it wasn't. It was actually very bad in many ways. So the kind of customer that was like super healthy, super green, according to that, did end up churning, and it was kind of one of the only customers to churn because it was far too much weighted on the numeric data we could get our hands on, which was just usage statistics at that time, and we didn't have years of previous renewals to try and gauge correlations. We were kind of still like really finding our feet, kind of really defining our product market fit and how we fit into the kind of the layer of the different tools that are available then. And so yeah, it didn't it didn't really work, and I think that's like a kind of a common issue you'll come into when trying to build something like a health score in an early stage business, or trying to work out what metrics to monitor performance of the team or whatever it might be. Like, you don't have like a lot of historic data usually to be able to draw those correlations and make it predictive.
Exactly that. It's not having enough data to make something really intelligent work. So, you don't know yet, right? And what is meaningful. So you've got to kind of figure these things out, and that's why an elaborate health score, whether it's in a spreadsheet or whether it's in something like HubSpot or Salesforce, it might be meaningless because you don't have enough information yet to know what actually are the real indicators that you should be looking at. So I think that's a really, really valuable point. And it's a little bit like implementing systems when you're actually not ready you haven't got the right data to put into those systems to get the money out of them yet. You don't always know what things that you should be focusing on. How did you approach building customer journeys in those early stages when you're focusing on really what's important, rather than having an elaborate customer journey? Where did you really focus your attention?
So I started by speaking with customers. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's just so important. And any other team members that had been interfacing with customers to really understand what is the current customer journey? What are we doing? Maybe we're already doing some kind of onboarding call. And what are the pain points? What are the bottlenecks? And I do always like to map out what the kind of customer journey looks like, and what those blockers are and where we kind of want to get to. And I think that's just a really helpful way of kind of helping you to map out and visualize clearly, like, where are the bottlenecks? What do we need to work on first? And depending on the kind of portfolio of customers you already have, where they are in like renewal cycles, I've often found like onboarding is going to be the first area you need to look at initially. Um, because it's quite likely, but for a lot of the early stage businesses I've been in, the renewals are kind of a bit down the line.
Hmm.
Maybe you haven't gone for your first renewal cycle just yet, but you do have other new customers starting right now, and you want to make sure that they are absolutely successful. And there probably hasn't been too much focus on creating a kind of a clear onboarding journey. So then I might zero in on that part of the journey to look at that in a bit more detail and think about how we can improve it with the tools that we have now, and are there other things that we need to bring in to make it better.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I often get asked about when I'm consulting with smaller, earlier stage businesses is how do we build in upsell? And I'm like, stop, stop thinking about upsell. When do you start thinking about upsell?
So I think it will depend a lot on where the customers are in their journey and where the business is in its maturity. So I would like to think about kind of customer success maturity in like a few different ways. Like, first of all, do we actually understand the value that we are delivering to customers? Like, do we really know do we have product market fit? Do we know what they are liking from the platform now? First of all, that's often a question you need to define at really early stage business. And then, can we quantify that? Can we measure that? Can we demonstrate that we are kind of providing a return on investment already, in order to then think about upsell conversations? And do we even have upsell levers to pull just yet? We kind of might not have kind of thought about that in terms of Is it based on a seat model? Is it based on different features or products we can add in at an additional cost? So if we haven't kind of defined what value is just yet, and we aren't able to demonstrate that our customers are successful and feel confident about retaining them, then I agree with you. It's like too early to think about upsell. So I would have a kind of a similar conversation with like probably the founder who is asking about that, in terms of think about, okay, let's just look at our maturity of our CS function just yet. We need to kind of get to a base level of these different things, like just understanding value. Maybe it's making sure we have a good onboarding process before we can run and do upsell and advocacy.
And do you think that's interesting? And do you think like, have you been out of interest around? Have you been in have you joined companies that might be like pre-seed, where they're like, we haven't got renewal at all for 9 months or 2 years, and so then it's like, well, let's get the onboarding journey right. But then have you also joined ones where they are sort of coming up to renewals, and actually they sort of have a version of an onboarding journey, but the renewals are the bit you have to sort out? Or like, have you kind of come in that sort of pre-seed or Series A, or like, is it a little bit different what you have to focus on depending on how new that customer success organization is, really?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think I've probably done more of ones where the renewals are a little bit further down the line, but where I have joined and the renewals coming up straight away, then again, it's like, keep it simple. Let's implement a simple process for that. Like, do we need to get them onto our new paper, like our new contracts? Are there some basic things that we need to do there? Are we asking for CPI increases already? A lot of businesses kind of forget to do that. Can we can just introduce that, and then it's just, we're at least like meeting inflation. So yeah, thinking like really like simply, what can we do to improve that now? And as I mentioned, do we already know if there are levers that we can pull to have upsell conversations?
And I think that what I've seen is kind of two approaches to renewal, which is in earlier stage, which is, oh crap, we haven't thought about renewal and we've not spoken to these clients for a while because we've been so busy doing the growth part of the business. So we don't really know what they're going to do. Or actually, on the flip side, it could be that people are actually really close to the customers because it is a smaller portfolio. They've been speaking to them a lot. They've been learning about that product feedback. And so renewal is almost not a thing because it's just, been part of the conversation. Which of those sort of two end of the spectrum scenarios have you seen more of?
That's an interesting question. I think it's usually at early stage, you probably do know most of your customers quite well. There might be some that you don't know better, because maybe you've got some older customers that are kind of pre-product market fit, that are not a right fit for what the product is now, if you've
Right.
been on that kind of journey. But often what I find is that even if a business is speaking to customers quite regularly, they might not be having those conversations around renewal and asking kind of the hard question of like, just point blank, like, are you intending to renew? Sometimes it can be dancing around that topic and kind of assuming that if we deliver these things that they're asking for, that means that they're going to renew their contract. And particularly when you're dealing with really large enterprises where there's lots of different stakeholders, and the stakeholders you're dealing with, day to day, week to week, are different to the economic buyer who's going to sign the contract, there can be a bit of misalignment there. So yeah, even if you are speaking with a customer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually know what they're going to do when it comes to renewal.
Yeah, I
And
think
I,
sorry, Debbie. I think that that's a really interesting one. I think it takes a certain amount of confidence to say, like, because obviously you don't want to hear bad news. You don't kind of something human in you like doesn't want to hear what they really think, but actually hearing what they really think is like really important. I think something a guy in my team that used to manage a current company used to be, he was Dutch, quite direct, and he'd always say, like, if you're renewing tomorrow, would you renew tomorrow? And that makes them go, it kind of makes them reveal more than they're maybe comfortable revealing. But then you kind of hear, like, if it's not that great, it's like, well, maybe we've got time to fix it. And actually, a challenging question like that can be quite impactful, can't it? Especially if you really want to feel for where their head's at.
I love that question. I learned about asking that question, I think, from a networking event from someone. And I really like to implement that, because even you can even learn a lot from how they respond, like if they're on a video call, like from their body language, in terms of how hesitant they
If
are.
they're like, "Oh," you're like, they give that face, and you're like, oh, that's a red one.
Or they say, "Oh, well, it won't be my decision." Then you go, "Right, okay, I obviously been speaking to the wrong person in
Oh
the last
yes,
6 months."
I couldn't say. I'm going to give you a non-answer there. That's not also a red flag.
And the other thing you mentioned there, was price increases, and I've seen a lot of going into businesses that have maybe not been at that early stage. They're maybe a bit older, but they've never done a price increase because of that fear. The same fear of asking about a renewal is asking, "I'm going to put my price up now." And like, how have you found that in your renewal conversations in earlier stage?
I think there's different appetites to that. I think if you haven't done a price increase before, like a CPI increase is just a nice easy way in, or like a CPI plus like 1%, or something like that. But I think often in the really early stages, I find that you can actually be quite bullish with your price increases, because you're probably also trying to work out how much you should be charging new customers as well. You probably haven't got that nailed down. So sometimes I think because you're small and you're agile, you can kind of ask for like quite a big increase and justify it with, you've got all of these new features included, as you try and work out what the pricing should be, because like your early adopters have got an amazing amazing deal. You want to try and get them up a bit.
Yeah. Good. So it's great to hear about focusing on sort of one thing and keeping it simple. But how do you know when it's time to move on to the next thing? Because I know there's always a lot of noise, a lot of pulls and demands at the time. So how do you know, actually, I've got as far as I can take that one thing now, or there's something else building up that's going to take over. I need to go into focus on that now. How do you know when to shift your focus?
That is a really good question, because I think it can be so easy that something goes on and you incrementally improve it. And I think that's why it's really important to kind of define what you're trying to achieve at the get-go, before you start. So you create an objective for yourself and a key result, as you would in a success plan, with a customer, to create your own success plan and to QBR yourself, to make sure that you are still focusing on the thing that matters most. Because in a early stage startup, I mean, in all startups, priorities change really quickly. You probably have like a finite amount of time to focus on these sorts of strategic projects alongside the day to day of being a CSM and working with customers. So I find it's really important just to like, first of all, define what your goal is and kind of what the baseline is that you need to get to, and then just make sure to continually review that. So like maybe it's every quarter, just do a little review of where you are, what your priorities are. Is that still the most important thing? Is there something else that we had queued up as like next in line to be the next most important? Is that now the priority?
I think we all need T-shirts that say QBR yourself. I really like that phrase. It's a really good thing. It's a really
I
good
actually like
idea.
that too. Yeah, it is a good point. I've done a personal QBR, but like I think a question I actually around as well is that I can imagine when you're in a startup situation where it is that early stage and you like employee number one basically, like, or one of the first employees, you must have to really get on with the founder, right, or founders, and I'm assuming there's a sort of that's have to be quite a tight collaboration, wouldn't it? I guess is that has that been sort of is that been quite simple? Normally, you just have to set the right expectations and let them know what your plan is, sort of thing, rather than, because obviously you can get bogged down with doing about 4 or 5 people's jobs in that sort of early stage scenario. I was wondering how you kind of like keep to the plan when there's so many different competing requirements from that business.
Yeah, I think that relationship is really important, particularly as you're likely going to be reporting in to one of the founders. And I think it's really, really important to make sure you're clear on when you're joining. What is the kind of primary objective right now? Is it that they need to increase NRR ahead of the next fundraise? Do they need to get more case studies and examples of how customers have received value so that they can use those as investor references, like really knowing what the kind of North Star is for customer success. And have the founders, have the leadership team worked out a kind of company strategy for the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, and beyond? And have they done that longer term thinking? Because they might be just in the process of kind of doing that at early stage businesses, or rethinking that, and then aligning a customer success strategy to that, and demonstrating, well, we need to do these foundational things in like year one, then that will enable us to do this in year two, and then we can make that even better in year three, and have a bit of a metric to try and track that like longer term. So maybe it's in year two, we hope that we can have CSMs um, handling more customers each, so we can increase the team's capacity by doing some of this foundational stuff. And that way, when you've got that North Star metric and you've kind of outlined and agreed on that priority, which will be a collaboration, when they kind of come back around, a few months down the line and say, well, actually, I've heard about this thing. Like, it would be so great if we could create like a customer community. Let's do that. Hang on. No, let's focus on our most important things. Is the priority still to get those customer referrals? Well, we need to make sure we redefine value and we are really attracting value first.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So bringing them back to the key priorities, right? Because like I said, there's probably people might get excited and be like, let's do this thing. It's like, if I do that thing, then I can't do the thing that really matters, and that takes probably a bit of confidence to push back, I guess, as well.
Yeah, there's definitely some influencing. It's not just about you deciding to focus on one thing. It's also about making sure your internal stakeholders are also aligned to just focusing on one thing, and how you track that and keep them coming back to that is really important. Do you use any tools or frameworks to help you do that?
So I think I've been working that out over the last few years. As I mentioned, when I first went into CS, it was just a bit like, oh, I've got to learn everything and try and do this. But now, I have kind of got a bit of a matrix in my mind that I've tried to put into like paper, so I can share that with founders, which is, these are the different levels of maturity in CS, and these are the different areas we need to focus on. So we need to make sure we work out like the operational stuff first. Like, do we actually know what the organizational structure and kind of service delivery model is going to look like? Do we know what metric is most important to us right now, given the metrics that are important to you and the board and to investors? And then have we defined value? Do we have product market fit? Can we kind of do onboarding in a scalable way? Then can we manage renewals? Can we manage advocacy and upsell? And kind of take them on that journey from just putting out fires to something more proactive and hopefully then predictive. So I think creating a bit of a customer journey for your customer success organization.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So we've talked through from the beginning here around not over engineering the health score, and kind of going off the fact that you've got no real meaningful historical data to build that from anyway. So keeping that simple, and then sort of making sure that you're keeping your customer journey simple as well, and trying to identify those bottlenecks, the pain points, and staying close to your customers during those really early stages, so that you can, understand where the challenges are, where the product market fit is aligning. Um, Thinking about upsell too early if you don't have upsell levers in place, if you haven't delivered value so far, and really making sure you've got that base level first, and then moving on to renewals, the end of that customer journey, or the next phase of the customer journey, hopefully, if you're keeping them, and making sure you've got some just simple key checks, making sure you're asking those simple questions of, are you actually going to renew, and are you the person that's going to make that decision? And then you introduce the concept of making sure you keeping yourself focused on the right things at the right time by doing that sort of personal QBR check as well. And I really love the mention of the matrix at the end, and having that sort of tool or framework in your mind. I think that's great. If you were in an elevator and you had a minute to really sort of nail your, like, this is absolutely what you should do if you are early stage, what would you say to someone in that lift?
I would say speak to your customers, find out what the biggest pain points are honestly, and agree with your founders on the primary objective, and then QBR yourself. Make sure that you are coming back to what is most important and is really going to move the needle against that really important objective.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's really, I think, been really interesting. Clearly, we wanted to bring Iram onto the podcast because of this sort of real wealth of experience. So I feel like you probably are quite comfortable now in a fairly uncomfortable situation of being in the early startup. I guess the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. But massive wealth of experience there. So I think you know a huge amount of real world sort of advice, I think, there. So thank you very much for your time, Iram. It's been awesome having you on, as I knew it would be. Big thanks, Iram. Thank you, Deborah. I feel like we could probably wrap up our third podcast from the Customer Success Ground Up group, and very much look forward to seeing you all in our next episode coming very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Customer Success from the Ground Up podcast with me, Mike Marshall.
And me, Deborah Knight. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like and follow, and we'll see you on the next one.